Rounding the corner of the Xeno habitation ring, at a dead sprint, Zincher, security officer, second grade, slid to a stop in the middle of the corridor. His breathing came in sharp bursts, chest heaving as his large, sensitive ears twitched, searching for the sound that had pulled him from his patrol. But nothing. Silence pressed in from all sides, broken only by the low hum of the station's ventilation. For a long moment, Zincher stood frozen, questioning his instincts, his heart still pounding from the rush. He had heard it. He was sure. A cry, faint but clear, had echoed from this very corridor. A sound unmistakable in its urgency, something primal and terrifying, a wail of agony. He had reacted on impulse, running without thinking, propelled by duty and fear alike. But now, with only the hollow silence to greet him, doubt gnawed at his mind. It was only his second day on the job, after all. Perhaps his nerves were getting the better of him. Zincher ran a hand over his brow, trying to calm the growing unease. The Ronazzi weren't known for flights of imagination, least of all him. He had always prided himself on his focus, his level-headedness, even during his grueling academy training. But as he stood beneath the towering doorways of the Xeno ring, built for species many times larger than his own diminutive half-meter height, he felt small, vulnerable. The shadows cast by the doorframes seemed to stretch and bend, looming over him like silent watchers. "Calm down," he muttered to himself, turning to resume his patrol. Just a mind playing tricks. But then it came again, this time louder, closer. The sound ripped through the stillness like a blade, a raw, keening scream filled with unmistakable terror. The voice of one of his own kind, a fellow Ronazzi, in unspeakable pain. Zincher's blood ran cold. His body reacted before his mind could process what was happening. In a flash, he was racing down the corridor toward the source of the sound, his paws pounding against the floor. The corridor stretched endlessly before him, every second dragging on as the cries grew louder, more frantic. Someone was suffering, someone was dying, and he had to act. Skidding to a halt in front of a massive door at the end of the hallway, Zincher's heart thudded in his chest. The screams were piercing now, muffled but unmistakable behind the thick metal barrier. Without thinking, he clawed at the lower access pad, trying to force the door open. His hands trembled as he fumbled over the codes, panic beginning to cloud his judgment. "Come on," he hissed through clenched teeth, the desperate cries from the other side clawing at his sanity. But as his paw hovered over the final override, his training resurfaced, he paused, forcing himself to think. Rushing in blindly could spell disaster. He checked the life support readings for the suite, his stomach dropping as he read the numbers on the screen. The artificial gravity and air pressure in the room were set to over 5 times the Ronazzi norm. Had he charged in without checking, he would have been flattened to the floor in an instant, crushed under the weight of an environment designed for much larger, sturdier beings. He swore under his breath and activated his emergency beacon, forcing his paws to stop shaking as he opened a direct line to central life support. "Zincher security. I need immediate adjustment to the life support settings in Suite 19C, Xeno Ring. Gravity and atmosphere are way above safe levels. Lower it now." His voice was tight, every second stretching into a painful eternity as he waited for a response. The screams had not stopped, and Zincher paced in front of the door, helpless. His tiny frame felt like a cruel joke, an insult in the face of the terrible cries coming from within. He barked again into his comm, urging the life support team to hurry. Why weren't they moving faster? As he waited, Zincher accessed the station logs, pulling up the suite's occupant information. He needed to know who or what was inside. His breath caught as he read the name. A human. His heart pounded faster, but now with a different fear. The newly contacted Deathworlders had been the talk of the station ever since they arrived, a species considered impossible by every Federation standard. Their strength, their resilience. It was the stuff of nightmares for a race like the Ronazzi, who were half their size. Yet this particular human had arrived with nothing but smiles, enamored by the adorable little space hamsters, as they called the Ronazzi. Zincher remembered the scene earlier that day, the human attempting to pet every Ronazzi they came across, oblivious to their nervous chatter. What had seemed like harmless curiosity now twisted into something darker in Zincher's mind. Another piercing scream from beyond the door shattered any last traces of comfort he had clung to. Life support report. Zincher barked into his comm, panic creeping into his voice. We're almost done. Just a few more seconds, came the reply. But those seconds stretched on like an eternity. The desperate wails tore through the door, burrowing into Zincher's mind. His claws dug into his palms as he waited, every nerve on edge. Was it already too late? Then at last the notification came. Gravity and atmosphere stabilized. You're clear to enter. Zincher didn't hesitate. He slammed his paw down on the override, and the door slid open with a hiss. He stepped into the room, his heart pounding. Zincher burst into the suite, his mind racing, expecting to find chaos, violence, anything that could explain the agonized screams he had heard. But what greeted him was far more disorienting. The suite was unnervingly quiet, and nothing seemed out of place, at least at first glance. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of standard accommodations, with high ceilings and furniture designed for the much larger Xenos that frequented this part of the station. The sleek, polished surfaces gleamed under the soft light, casting long shadows. But something was wrong. Fur was everywhere, scattered across the floor, piled in clumps on the furniture, strewn across the carpet, enough for it to cover an entire being. The sight of it made Zincher's stomach churn. His heart raced as he carefully stepped forward, his eyes darting around the room for any signs of life. Yet the eerie silence only deepened the longer he lingered. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, and no body. Just the fur, thick, coarse tufts covering nearly every inch of the space. And the silence, the absence of the tortured cries that had driven him here weighed heavily on him now. They had ceased the instant the door opened, as if something or someone was waiting for him. Zincher's ears twitched anxiously as he approached the center of the room. The stillness gnawed at him. The fur alone made no sense. Even for a species that shed, this was far too much. His training kicked in, the instinct to assess his surroundings quickly, to anticipate threats. Yet, despite the bizarre scene, nothing seemed to move, and there was no sign of anyone or anything. Where was a victim? The young security officer's mind raced, replaying the horrific screams over and over. It didn't add up. The human was supposed to be in custody, escorted by station security. Could there be another human here? Something his logs had missed? His claws flexed nervously as he scanned the large room for any hidden corners or alcoves, anywhere something could be lurking. His pulse quickened, but his instincts told him one thing. He was not alone. Suddenly, his attention snapped to the large bed across the room, its towering frame casting an ominous shadow. It was easily tall enough to obscure anything or anyone on the other side. His breath caught. If something had attacked, if something was hiding. Gritting his teeth, Zincher made his way to the bed, stepping cautiously over the clumps of fur. His small, quick steps felt thunderous in the quiet room, each one echoing off the walls as he approached the base of the bed. He stopped, staring up at the towering mattress. There was only one way to know for sure. Gathering his courage, Zincher scrambled up the side of the bedspread, his claws gripping the fabric as he pulled himself up. Every muscle in his body tensed with the expectation of danger as he reached the top. From his new vantage point, Zincher could finally see the entire room, and it was just as empty as before. No bodies, no attackers, just the unsettling remnants of fur scattered everywhere. Exhausted and confused, he sank onto the overlarge mattress, trying to make sense of it all. What could have caused those screams? Where was the victim? His mind raced through the possibilities, but nothing made sense. His chest heaved with frustration as he pressed a paw to his forehead, trying to suppress the rising tide of panic. Suddenly, the bed shook. Zincher's eyes widened in terror as the entire mattress trembled beneath him. Something was underneath. Before he could react, a low, guttural growl rumbled through the room, vibrating through the floor beneath his feet. Then, from under the bed, an enormous creature burst into the open. Zincher froze in horror. The beast was massive, easily towering over him by at least 20 centimeters. Its fur was mottled brown and black, thick and wiry, rippling across its muscular frame. Forward-facing eyes, dark and menacing, locked onto him, and its long snout parted to reveal a set of sharp, glistening teeth. Its ears were pointed, twitching with every breath it took, and its tail thrashed violently behind it, a clear sign of aggression, a predator. Zincher's blood turned to ice as he stood rooted to the spot, staring into the eyes of the beast. It prowled forward, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air, edging closer to the bed. The security officer backed away slowly, trying to keep his movements as small and non-threatening as possible. But the predator's gaze never wavered, its attention fixed on him with deadly focus. He needed to get out now, but the door was across the room, and the creature was between him and safety. Fumbling for his comm, Zincher flicked it on, hoping to send a distress signal. He barely managed to get out a syllable before the beast reacted. The growl returned, louder this time, and with terrifying speed. The predator crouched low to the ground, muscles coiling as it prepared to strike. Its tail whipped back and forth, the tension in the air growing unbearable. Zincher froze, his heart hammered in his chest. But instinct told him that any sudden movement would seal his fate. The creature's predatory instincts had kicked in, and Zincher was prey. Then, from his open comm channel, a voice crackled through the air. "Officer Zincher, what's your status? Are you—" The moment the voice came through, the beast lunged. Zincher's world exploded into chaos as the creature launched itself onto the bed with a roar, its massive frame landing mere inches from where he stood. The force knocked him backward, and he screamed in terror. "Ranger, heal!" Zincher lay sprawled on the mattress, panic surging through him as the massive creature towered above him, its fur bristling, teeth bared in a fearsome display. The air was thick with tension, and he could feel the floor shaking beneath him as the beast bounced excitedly, seemingly oblivious to the fear it instilled in him. His heart raced, but amid the terror, a voice echoed through the doorway, cutting through the chaos. "Ranger, heal!" The command was authoritative, piercing the thick haze of fear that surrounded Zincher. The creature halted mid-leap, its posture shifting from predatory to playful in an instant. It turned its massive head towards the door, tongue lolling out in what appeared to be unrestrained joy. The transition was so sudden that Zincher couldn't comprehend what was happening. As the figure in the doorway stepped forward, the realization hit him like a shockwave. The human, tall and imposing, stood framed against the light, hands restrained before her. Her expression was a mix of concern and disbelief, and the sight of her face was both comforting and disconcerting. "What the hell were you doing to my dog?" she exclaimed, her voice sharp and filled with indignation. Your dogs," Zincher stammered, trying to process her words amidst the surreal chaos unfolding before him. This creature, this predator, was not an assailant but a pet. A sense of disbelief mingled with confusion as he tried to reconcile the snarling beast with the idea of a domestic animal. "Yes, Ranger, he's just being playful." The human rushed forward, her hands moving as if to calm the creature. Zincher struggled to make sense of the scenario. How could this massive predator be anything other than a threat? The growls had sounded like death itself. "Playful?" he echoed, incredulous. "You call that playful? I thought he killed someone." The human, still trying to approach the hulking creature, laughed nervously, her voice a strange mixture of humor and exasperation. "You really don't understand, do you? Ranger's just excited. He hasn't had much exercise lately. And, well, he's a little enthusiastic." Zincher blinked, stunned. The laughter, the casual way she addressed the creature, suggested a bond that felt impossibly alien. But the screams, the agonized cries, he pressed, gesturing emphatically at the piles of fur that littered the room. "I heard them. I thought someone was dying. At this, the human's expression shifted to one of understanding. Oh no, she said slowly, her tone shifting from defensive to sympathetic. Ranger's toys are designed to mimic the sounds of prey animals. He gets a little carried away when he's playing, and sometimes he really tears into them. I didn't realize how it might sound to you. Zincher felt the floor drop out beneath him. The laughter that had echoed from the human moments before it turned to ashes in his throat. You're saying that noise was from a toy? The enormity of the misunderstanding began to unfold in his mind, weaving a tapestry of embarrassment and relief. Yes, the human nodded eagerly, rummaging through her belongings as she spoke. See, here's one of his toys. She produced a small, stuffed animal, a wretched thing, its form barely recognizable beneath the tufts of her clinging to it. When Ranger plays rough, he makes a lot of noise, and I've been a terrible owner. I haven't given him proper exercise since we arrived. I'm really sorry if that scared you. The pieces began to fall into place for Zincher. The fur, the cries, the complete lack of any blood. None of it had meant what he had initially thought. Ranger was not a killer but a companion. The truth was so simple yet profoundly disarming, the implications crashing over him like waves. Before he could respond, Ranger bounded toward the human, tail wagging furiously, and began to dance around her legs. His demeanor was jubilant, filled with a wild energy that seemed to banish any notion of menace. The human laughed, bending down to scratch behind Ranger's ears, her face brightening with affection. I should have considered how this would all look to you, she continued, standing and addressing Zincher once more. You've never met a dog before, have you? I can see how it might seem alarming. Zincher felt a wave of embarrassment wash over him. No, we don't have dogs on Ronazzi, he admitted, his voice quieter now. I thought I was witnessing something terrible. I thought. He trailed off, the weight of his assumptions hanging heavily in the air. The human smiled gently, a warmth radiating from her that made Zincher feel foolish and relieved all at once. It's okay. This is all new for you, I understand. But I promise you, Ranger wouldn't hurt a soul. He just wants to play. Just then, Ranger turned his large eyes toward Zincher, tilting his head quizzically as if sensing the change in the atmosphere. His tail wagged in invitation, and Zincher found himself softening, an involuntary smile tugging at his lips despite the earlier terror. Ranger, heel, the human commanded gently again, her tone now warm. Let's show our new friend just how friendly you can be. As she spoke, the enormous creature bounded toward him, tail still wagging, and for the first time, Zincher felt a flicker of intrigue rather than fear. Ranger approached slowly, sniffing the air, his demeanor far less threatening than before. See? Just a big softy, the human said, laughter lacing her voice as Ranger playfully nudged Zincher's leg. Tentatively, Zincher reached out, his paw brushing against the creature's fur. Ranger responded with a happy bark, and Zincher found himself laughing, a sound that felt foreign yet liberating. What had begun as terror and suspicion transformed into an unexpected bond, a shared understanding that could bridge their vastly different worlds. Maybe we can start over, Zincher suggested, looking up at the human, who smiled broadly in response. Absolutely, she replied, her eyes sparkling with warmth. Let's be friends.